Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you. And thank you so much for inviting me to share my experience with you. Hopefully, whatever I say is helpful to any degree. But yeah, my name is Eugy. I am a second year PhD student working at the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford with Professor Jeremy Bailenson. And today I'm going to kind of go over my experience as a teaching assistant and also as a research assistant being involved in Virtual People, which is one of the largest and longest courses that was taught inside VR. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. Hopefully this works. Okay. Do you see my screen or?
Yes, we can see
Okay.
the presentation.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna kind of go over some of the details of the class and really talk about the low level, talk about it at a very low level, like how it was run, what challenges we faced, what worked, what didn't work, and maybe some anecdotes about it. And if you're interested in seeing more of this class and its structure and sort of the research component that went into it, there are some talks that we've done that are available on YouTube. The first one is a talk that I gave on sort of the more higher level stuff of the things that I'll cover today. And the second one is actually by my advisor, Jeremy, in HAI's seminar, which just happened yesterday. So these are all available on YouTube if you want to learn more about it. So yeah, without further ado, Virtual People is a course that's been offered since 2003, and it's basically about VR. It covers VR in the medical field, VR for empathy, VR for training, avatars, presence, and it's a 10-week long course, and it basically covers VR's breadth and depth. And typically it's taught in a traditional lecture hall. I've personally never taken the class in its traditional format because I came during the pandemic. So I've only known it in its VR format, which I think is really funny. But yeah, when the pandemic hit and a lot of educators and classrooms were forced to move online, it made a lot of sense for Virtual People to move to the very medium that it teaches students about, which is virtual reality. Now, Virtual People is a really big class and hundreds of students sort of enroll in it every time it's offered. So we offered it in the summer quarter last year and around 100 students took it then. And this past quarter last year, we had a little over 160 students taking it. And what we did is we sent Oculus Quest 2 headsets to each of the students that were enrolled in the course. So we had either the headsets mailed to them or we had them pick them up if they were on campus or nearby. And that alone was a huge feat. And we had people in the lab who were sort of like keeping track of all the headsets and making sure that they were being cleaned properly, being stored properly, and they were being tracked as well, as in who takes what. And I'm sure that if you have a much smaller class, things like this will be easier to scale down. But this was a large class. And as you can see in this picture, we have hundreds of headsets sort of like, they're actually right behind me right now. But we had hundreds of headsets that we sent out to students. So yeah, I'm going to quickly go over the general structure of the class. I won't go too deep into it just because this is something that I covered in one of my other talks. But we had three main components of this class. So we had a panel style lecture. So students did readings and they had assignments like discussion posts, and we had select students act as panelists and they would bring in their own questions and they would pose them to Jeremy or a guest lecturer who would then respond to those questions. And then other students would sort of spectate that as it happened. And we also had VR journeys. So these were opportunities basically for students to try out different VR experiences. And some of them were synchronous, meaning that they were done together as a class. So we had a Zoom window open with TA sort of on standby and helping students if they were lost. And students would wear their headsets from wherever they were. So they were typically in their houses or their dorms or anywhere else. And we had students meet inside somewhere in virtual reality. So for example, one time we went to Altspace VR and we did this guided meditation session. We did this on the moon and someone would lead us as we were meditating together. We also had students form smaller groups and they were asked to direct a play inside Engage. So they wore different costumes and they would record a scene. We also had asynchronous experiences. So we had them try out, for example, in the empathy week, we had them try out 6x9, Clouds Over Sidra. So we gave them links to different experiences that they could try. And I think having this VR journey component was really great. And if you have any experiences or content that are more standalones that you want your students to try, this is sort of a very flexible model to incorporate that into your class. Now, the third portion is where most of the VR or the big chunk of VR took place. So every week we had discussion sections inside VR, and I'll delve deeper into sort of the structure of this and how we plan this out a little bit later. But yeah, this was just sort of like the general model of what the class was like. These three things were repeated every week, or almost every week. Now, there are some things that I think are really important in figuring out before you sort of jump into VR and launch everyone into virtual environments. And that is, how do you sort of make sure that everyone feels prepared and knows where to go and knows what they're doing, and and figuring out what they can do if they either get lost or if they feel that they're not being supported enough. So we had a training session. And we knew that we were going to use Engage, and we knew that there was going to be a learning curve in that they need to learn how to teleport, join a session, not accidentally join another public session that might be going on, figure out how to draw in 3D space, bring in models. So these were all things that are easy to use once you learn how to use them, but sort of getting to that stage is a bit hard. So we wanted to have enough training sessions to make sure that they felt comfortable. So we had different TAs lead a chunk of students. So we had like each TA take on about 30 students, and we all went inside VR together. And it was pretty, I would say, hectic in that it's basically a lot of students all in the same virtual space. Everyone's talking over another. People are spawning from different places. Audio is all over the place. But it's also a really great playground for students to ask any questions that they want to and make many mistakes and not feel the pressure of having to learn something or finish a task. So this was just more of an opportunity or playground space for them to learn how to use VR. And I would like to say typically around 2 training sessions would be ideal. And that's what we did in the summer quarter. We had 2 training sessions across the time span of 2 weeks, but we also had 1 training session in the fall, and that also worked perfectly fine. So it depends on, I guess, how much time you have and how much time you want to dedicate to training. So this is just another picture of what the training session looked like. As you can see, one of our TAs is taking a picture of all the students, and they're all just cheering. And just to go quickly, we'll go back. As I said, it kind of became this huge playground, and people brought in models everywhere, and it was kind of laggy, but like in a exciting, very stimulating way. Another thing that is important to have is multiple channels of support outside of VR. So oftentimes, if a student is lost or doesn't know what to do, it's important to let them know that they can still reach out. And it's not really easy to check your email constantly as you're in world and you have this headset on. You can't really check your email or look at your phone often to see if anyone's reaching out to you. So one thing we did is we had a channel for immediate help and non-immediate help. So our immediate channel or support channel was Zoom. So we had a Zoom window open and it would sort of be running in the background, and we had students we sent students the link to it every time, and a TA would be sort of manning that Zoom session. And obviously, if you are the only instructor who is they're teaching, it might be hard to have extra support if you don't have a TA. But one thing that we realized was that at the beginning, a lot of students do come to these Zoom channels because they have different issues of how do I join this session, or this happened, or my Wi-Fi is not working, something is happening. So a lot of students do go to the Zoom session for help at the beginning, but we realized that around week 3, week 4, students sort of get the hang of it. So they stop showing up. And by the end of like week 8, week 9, like no one was ever there in the Zoom channel. So if you can, and if you're the only instructor, if you can get help, at least in the first 2 weeks, that would be ideal. If not, it is possible to sort of do this simultaneously, as in have the Zoom session open while you're in the headset. But if you can get additional help, that would be the best case scenario. And the other channel of support that we had was Canvas. So this was more student directed and student oriented. The students would post any questions that they had, and they would help each other. So if they encountered a specific problem, another student might have had that same experience. So they sort of answer and support each other in that way. And of course, also the TAs also jump in and help if it's something that the other students haven't encountered. Another thing that's also important in deciding before you launch your class into VR is choosing the right platform or platforms and experiences. So there's a lot of platforms, and an increasing amount are being produced every single day. And there's also a lot of experiences that are more standalone, meaning they're one-off experiences that are being developed. So it's really important to figure out what you want. And I found that talking to other educators in VR sort of helped in finding out what's good out there and what might be relevant for what you want to teach, so that you're not overwhelmed with this question of where do I start, or where do I even look for these experiences. And it's nice to sort of rely and know that there are other educators out there who have had these experiences as well. Yeah, so the discussion sections that we ran each week were in small groups of around 8 to 14 students. We had larger groups in the summer quarter, and we kept them a bit more intimate and small in the fall quarter. And these typically ran for around 30 minutes. It's been shown that people tend to get simulator sickness at around the 20-minute mark. So we wanted to have this plus minus time frame so that students wouldn't be feeling absolutely horrible by the time their discussion was over. And we also let them know that they could drop out of the session, or they could take their headset off and take a break if they wanted to at any time point, so that they didn't feel pressure to, like keep going if they were starting to feel really dizzy and nauseated. And we also kept this 10-minute buffer at the very beginning. So the discussion section time slot itself was, I believe, around an hour, maybe even shorter. So we had 10 minutes at the beginning for students to figure out any technical difficulties, so they could jump onto that Zoom support channel if they needed to, and find their way to the correct session and log in and do any updates if they needed to. And then the actual discussion section was 30 minutes. And then at the very end, they could linger around and talk to the TA if they wanted to. But yeah, we kept them pretty short so that not everything was done inside VR. And, sometimes students drop out for different reasons that are not related to simulator sickness. So for example, students might drop out due to Wi-Fi reasons, their headsets dying. Those are things that are just inevitably going to happen. And these are things that, are difficult to control, but just keep in mind that at least at the very beginning of the class, there might be a lot of issues. And it is a very case-by-case thing. So it's nice to have a lot of flexibility and understanding, at least at the beginning. Not that you shouldn't have that same standard of flexibility throughout, but especially at the beginning, it's important to, I think, understand that it's sort of like a case-by-case thing. So we wanted to keep certain things specifically inside VR and something specifically outside of VR. So like I said earlier, we had 3 different things going on in the course. We had the panels, we had the VR journeys, and we had the discussions. And there was this idea of, should we just do everything inside VR? Should we do Jeremy lecturing inside VR? So there's a question of, what do we want to keep inside VR and what do we want to keep outside of it? And we really thought about the unique affordances of VR and tried to stay true and loyal to that. So some of the examples of things that are really unique to VR are being able to have creative use of the space and tools that are specifically only available in VR. So I don't know if you have tried different experiences like Tilt Brush, Beat Saber. Those are things that are, pretty uniquely available or only available inside those devices. So in Engage, for example, we were able to draw in 3D space, and we were able to bring in 3D models and scale them. And another thing that we really wanted to prioritize was being able to have students interact with one another, because that is something that, as a student myself, I feel like I missed in my in-person interactions, just kind of being able to feel the presence of my friends around me and getting to see them nodding their head, moving their hands and standing close to me. So that was something that we wanted to preserve, and we found it was perfectly done inside VR, or maybe not perfectly, but to some degree it was done well inside VR. So this being able to understand nonverbal cues like gaze, gestures, and feel presence. And another thing is that we were able to bring students into really different and unique environments that might be really hard to visit in the physical world. So going back to the VR journey example, the meditation session was done in like on the moon. Those are things that are really unique. And if you want to take students underwater or go to some outrageous places, Jeremy has this thing called a dice model. So things that are dangerous, impossible. Those are things that you can do inside VR without any significant consequences. So this is an example of what the discussion section looked like in the fall. Students were sort of embodying these avatars. They had different outfits, and we all sort of stood around in a circle. And in this picture on the far left, you can see there's an avatar drawing with the 3D tool. And yeah, so there's that really cool, unique aspect of the spatial features. And yeah, this is another example of students just like sitting around a table having discussions. And as you can see, you can really just feel someone sitting right next to you, and you can make eye contact. Although what eye contact is in VR is, questionable, but it's still something that you can do. And you can see them nod their heads and wave their arms and stuff like that. And another thing that we really emphasized was ABC, which is always be charging. So if you've ever tried using a standalone headset, so a headset that's not connected to a PC, these headsets might die pretty fast because a lot of these applications sort of drain the battery really fast. So we found that in some devices, you couldn't really use them even for 30 minutes. So we emphasize that students should be charging all the time. And as a TA, I had to run sections back to back. So this was one of the harder parts as a TA. So because the fall class was so large, it was around 200 students, or it was close to 200 students. We had 3 TAs who were actually going inside VR and doing these discussion sections. And we had 24 sections. And we wanted to keep these discussion sections done in 2 days or in that 2-day time window. We each took on 8 sections, and I took a lot of them in the early morning and late at night. So they started at like 8:30 a.m. and then went up until I think 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. So it was like a long day of me just being inside VR for the whole day. And funnily enough, I got used to the simulator sickness. I get really, really sick, but I realized that over time it kind of decreases. I think I've jumped back into the stage I was before. But during that quarter, I was sort of like really just able to live inside VR, which I'm not really sure if I should be proud of, but it's just something that just happened naturally. But yeah, I noticed that a lot of students, sometimes would forget to charge, so they would drop out because their headset died, and they would just email me and say, hey, I'm so sorry, my headset died. So that's something that I was expecting to happen. So we just kept emphasizing, always be charging. You can't force students to charge, they're in their own space, but it's nice to emphasize. So yeah, one some personal anecdotes were that I really enjoyed this experience just because I think a lot of the special things about being in a class in person are missing on Zoom or distance learning formats. So being able to see another person and you can really goof around with your friends. I hate using the term goof around, but in some of the discussion sections, for example, students were like shadow boxing one another. They were like in their own corners, bringing like helicopters and flying them around. And one time I was in this library setting and we had students break off into smaller groups. And the thing about Engage is that sometimes you can enable spatial audio. So you're able to have like so you're able to have spatialized audio so you can have smaller private conversations in one corner and in a different corner there can be another conversation going on and you wouldn't be able to hear one another. So we had that enabled and seeing how students interacted in that environment was, I think, really special. And you can't really see that happening even in situations where situations similar to like breakout rooms, which is, I think, as close to this scenario or one that I can think of. Another example that I thought was really memorable was one time a student found a glitch in one of the environments and they found out that they could jump out of the window. So what we did was we stacked these stairs next to the window and we each took turns going up this staircase and we would jump into this abyss. And it was like horrible in that like I felt so sick, like because you're literally jumping into this endless like darkness and then you respawn somewhere so your stomach kind of hurts. But those were just sort of like really interesting opportunities that you really can't get anywhere else. And I think it's like a really bonding experience that students can really remember. And another thing that I really want to emphasize is that obviously all educators have very different desired learning outcomes and you want your students to leave the class with something special, or every educator I think has something that they want their students to leave with, be it a good experience or actually learning like a very concrete retaining information type of way, or just experiential learning, being able to connect with others. So depending on what your desired learning outcome is, you're really able to tailor your classroom to fit it the way you want it to and really design your curriculum and your syllabus to the way you want it to turn out to be. And one thing that we really enjoyed was being able to see students be creative. So one of our final projects, and in the summer we focused more on people, but on the fall we focused on places. And one of the assignments was they had to create an environment. So it was free form, there were no restrictions. So students could bring in models, students could draw in 3D space, they could create something educational, create a game, do anything that they wanted, build a safe space, build an environment. And just going through all these environments, and these are some of the examples that you see on the screen, was really just amazing, just being able to see how they leveraged VR's uniqueness to sort of express their ideas in creative ways. But another thing that I do want to emphasize is that it's really important to make these decisions beforehand. Obviously, there's a lot of trial and error, and you'll learn things as you go, and you'll realize that there's always edge cases to this. But it's important to understand and plan things out quite thoroughly beforehand, just because there is this possibility of students losing their awe and the power of VR and uniqueness of VR kind of fading as time passes by if you're using VR in the wrong ways, I think. So it's best, I think, to not use VR for the sake of like using it and just because it's cool, just because it's something that you want to incorporate into the classroom, but reserving it for things that would be best inside VR. It's interesting because VR has its own like social interactions and like rules that come out. But I did read some anecdotes of students saying that they felt more comfortable just because no one can really see what they look like. And you're able to sort of embody a body without actually you having to be there. So I'm not entirely sure about, I think there's a lot of individual differences. I personally still always feel nervous, even inside VR, even speaking up inside VR, just because the sense of presence is so strong. And like you really do feel like someone's standing next to you. And for me, that was more overpowering than feeling like no one could really see what my facial expressions were, which is, a huge component of um, feeling anxious or feeling anxious to speak up. So yeah, I don't really know the answer to that. But yeah, there are definitely other unique cues that came up. So for example, you know how like in Zoom, when you want to talk, you can raise your like virtual hand or you can raise your physical hand, or you can like unmute yourself. In VR, you have to make the motion of like moving your wrist and like going like this. So you could really tell when someone's about to speak. So there was like this like 2 second gap of like watching someone be like doing this or their avatar going like that. So that was sort of like a nice primer for being like, oh, I'm going to speak now. So yeah, that was like one unique cue that I found was very specific to VR. I guess the biggest challenge is the planning beforehand. And just because there's so much content out there and there's so much stuff that you could do, so really like figuring out what you want to do inside VR was something that we discussed a lot as TAs, and with Jeremy we were figuring out what we wanted to do for VR journeys. There were also a lot of discussions we had with the platform that we wanted to choose, just because sometimes some platforms are more public than others, so we wanted to sort of decide, hey, do we want students to be able to have access to the larger world and potentially be lost or experience something negative, or do we want to keep it private? So there's a lot of questions that I think in planning that goes in before. But then I would also argue that there were so many challenges during the actual teaching itself. So for example, like one thing we couldn't foresee was there are a lot of firewall issues. So for example, some students had weren't able to join the world and we weren't able to figure it out. So we had a lot of like back and forth with a tech team of Engage being like, what's happening here? So there was a lot of sort of like trying to figure out case by case situations. And those were things that, you can't really plan out before, because like you just didn't even realize that that could have been a problem. So there was a lot of like, oh no, what do we do? And like reaching out to people to figure out, like brainstorm what could be an issue. My best lesson learned. I honestly think it's more of a soft lesson in that there you just need to have so much patience and flexibility. I remember as I was in the headset, I was also on the Zoom call just because I wanted to have it in the background. So there would be people talking to me from there, people emailing me as I was in VR as well. So I think to make sure that students have a really nice experience, you have to understand that there is a learning curve, and students might feel frustrated, but you don't also want students to leave the class feeling like, oh, VR is so hard, I don't want to use it, I feel anxious every time I use it. So there is a little bit of like gap or a little bit of room for empathy and understanding where students of different levels are coming from. So I don't know if that's a lesson learned, but I think that's something that I really felt when I was TAing for the class. There's this quote by Jerome Lanier that I really like, but it's basically talking about nothing can really beat reality. So like when you take off your headset and you feel like the wind on your face and you feel like your own sweat, like you feel like, or you see the trees actually blowing, it's nothing can really beat that. And I think about that a lot because when you go inside VR, I think you go inside it with expectations. And my expectations are not that VR is something that's supposed to replace the real world. Um, I acknowledge that at least the graphics are not there yet. And I can see like the boundaries of my headset. I can literally feel it weighing down and like giving me wrinkles. And I feel my like sweat. So like I acknowledge that it's not real in the way that people might hope or expect it to be. But there's a special type of presence that you feel, I think, uniquely inside VR. So for example, being able to go underwater is something that you can't really do. I mean, maybe you can, but like you can't really like interact with like sea creatures. Like there's this one experience in Engage where there's like dinosaurs running around you. Like those are things that feel very, that make you feel like you're in some environment, obviously not like an actual prehistoric beach with literal dinosaurs, but it is something sort of, I think, in between, that makes it really special. And another thing is like social presence. So feeling like someone's actually there. So for example, us talking on Zoom, I can see your face, I can see your reactions. But if you ask me the question, do I feel like you're in the same room with me? I would say no. But in a virtual environment, you, when someone's actually next to you, like you maintain some distance between them, because otherwise we would all be like sort of like in the same spot, and like we would all be like, um yeah, and that's actually the funny thing about Engage, is that the spawning point is the same for everyone. So you're sort of, your avatar sort of dropped into the same spot, and you can see students immediately like jumping to a different place because they don't like the idea of like being in the same exact spot. So those are some different levels and types of presence that are uniquely in VR, but I don't think they're the same type that you would feel in the physical world. One decision that I was actively a part of was the social platform. So there were a lot of different candidates. We checked out VR chat, we checked out Altspace, and we checked out several others. And there were a lot of candidates that were all really great. But some things that we considered were, for example, what the avatars would look like. Obviously, there are limitations in terms of what do we do for students that are non-binary. They might not be represented. What happens to students who are of a certain skin color, and that platform doesn't provide any avatar that has that skin color. So those were things that we kind of wanted to be mindful of, but we knew that there were some things that we couldn't control. So yeah, kind of like looking at what type of affordances were unique to that platform was something we considered. And obviously the private versus public thing was something we considered. So for example, for VR chat, when we were touring it, I got lost. And I know this is really embarrassing, but like I like was emailing like Jeremy and like other students being like, oh my God, where are you? Like, where am I? Like, and they were like, I don't know. Like, and they were like, you should add me as a friend. So that took like so much time for me to just be like, oh, you guys are here. So we were like, oh no, what happens if like students do that? So we were like, if it's easy for us to get lost in a certain world, is this the best platform? So that's one thing that we considered. And Engage was really like simple in that you could make a session, have a password, students put an ID in it, and then you enter, and it's your own world. So there was no real opportunity for you to be like, oh, I stumbling across the world and being like, who are you? And which happened a lot in some other platforms. And sometimes harassment happens. Like one time I got harassed by like really young kids being like, you can't even do that. And you know what I mean? Like it's, so we wanted to consider like potential negative experiences that students could have. And ultimately we decided that Engage was the best one for that. But in terms of experiences, I think those were those were made dominantly by the content that we wanted to teach students. So for Empathy Week, we had like 6x9, Clouds of Residra. Those were experiences designed to make you feel like empathy and connected and understand. So we weren't gonna like be like, hey, for Empathy Week, do Beat Saber. Like that was not something that we wanted to do. But yeah, so each week, depending on the theme, we made a decision to have this experience. So like another example is for Climate Change Week, we had them do the name's slipping my mind now, and I feel horrible for it. But we had them like look at coral reefs, and we had them kind of really go inside underwater and understand what was happening to our climate. And for sports training week, another example, we had them like understand what it means to like be a student training using VR for like football or for skiing and stuff like that. So those experiences were more centered and decided based on what we wanted to teach, regardless of VR. And we selected based off of that. I don't know about the other teaching assistants. I don't know how much training they went through or what they did to prepare, but I'm gonna say a lot. But for me, I just spent a lot of time in the platform just so that I could know how to answer questions and be like the most confident in being able to answer any questions that came to that. So I dedicate a lot of hours by myself, like experimenting. And if I needed someone else to be there, I would just ask someone to jump into the world with me. But it was a lot of like exploring on my own and also reaching out to people who were involved. So we worked with the Engage Tech team. So we asked them a lot of questions. We emailed them. We asked like, hey, can we jump inside the world quickly to ask about this? So yeah, there's a lot of like training that has to go on, I think, as a on an instructor level as well. Just because a lot of things can go wrong there as well. And this is something that so before Virtual People, I was involved as not as a teaching assistant, but I helped out in another class that had a very similar format where we met inside Engage. And one thing that was not I was not cautious enough about was I made all these like elaborate plans on what a class was going to look like. So I was like, okay, we're going to go to this world and then immediately go to this world. We're going to try this experience. And I kind of like packed things like in a short period of time. And I hadn't actually tested out myself. So when we actually launched it, it was fun and not the way I was expecting it to be, in that like everyone was like, hey, like I'm in this world, like where are you? Or like I'm in this room, like where did everyone go? So a lot of things I think went not according to plan. So one thing that we decided to keep in mind for Virtual People was limiting the number of like moving around inside VR. So in that very early iteration of it, we moved worlds inside Engage. So you can move environments inside Engage. So you can go to like the beach and then everyone can move to like the lecture hall. So we decided to like minimize that. So we did a lot of trial and error of like how many people should be in one session. Should we have 50 people? Should we have 10 people? Those were things that we learned as we were doing. And then Virtual People sort of like the final sort of product of the things that we learned from that. As much as I love being in the realm of theory, application is so different inside VR. So one thing we did a lot of was so like when the summer happened, there was a lot of trial and error in that we had to learn a lot of things. And then when the fall happened, we were better prepared for all the things that went not as expected in previous iterations. So we as TAs collectively went together and were like, oh, this is something that might go wrong, or this is how this works. And we did that for Jeremy as well. So like we made sure that everyone had training, like actual training, because we've done this also where in one of the earlier iterations, I made like a video of like what VR would look like. So I made like video instructions being like, you should see this button and then you should press this. But like none of that really mattered, I think, because like at the end of the day, you can't really watch a video about VR and then remember all the steps and then wear the headset, because like you can't see the screen and the headset at the same time. So that's why we changed the training to everyone go inside VR, including Jeremy. Jeremy was there as well. And just like learning how to use it, because just verbal teaching, written instructions, I don't think work that well. So it's I think some time commitment, but I think it's practical and faster on the long run. Thank you for having me. And I'm like really excited to see how people play this out. Like there's so many directions that you can take it. Like I've talked to people who use VR in like really different, unique ways. Like there were people who use it for like training someone how to be a barista and like there were just so many ways you can use VR in like ways that I didn't expect it to the point where I was like, oh man, like I wish I had thought of that. So I think like if you are someone who loves being creative, like this is like a perfect playground. Like, and I think the students would really appreciate it as well. I want to acknowledge the team effort that went into it. Obviously, there's a lot of people that were involved in it because this was such a big class. But I've talked to other educators who have had smaller classes of around 10 to 30-ish people, and it's much easier to manage those classes. But it is a team effort, and I want to thank everyone that was involved. And yeah, we have a research component to a lot of these experiences as well. So if you want to kind of see what projects we're working on, that's our website. And if you ever want to reach out and talk to me more about VR classrooms, incorporating VR in unique ways, I'm always happy to talk to people about it.